Welcome to the Deep Dive. You're here because, like us, you want to get smart on interesting topics and pretty fast.
Yeah, no messing around.
Exactly. So today we're looking at this gardening hack, one that sounds, well, maybe a bit out there. Can plain old aspirin really give you bigger, healthier tomatoes that fight off disease?
That's the big question. So our mission, you could say, is to dig into the source that's making these pretty bold claims.
Right, to unpack it all. The source presents this, potentially amazing and easy fix for common tomato problems.
And we've got the text right here. It lays out the how-to and what you supposedly get out of it.
So let's dive in.
Let's do it. The core idea, the central claim, is that just by popping an aspirin in the planting hole and then spraying the plants now and then with an aspirin mix.
You get this dramatic improvement.
Yeah.
Bigger tomatoes, healthier plants.
Yeah, dramatically better harvests. It really frames it as a simple solution to things gardeners really struggle with.
Okay, so this main claim, the source isn't shy about it. They say using aspirin like this can take your tomatoes from, what, cherry-like?
Yeah, small ones.
To get this apple-sized.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big jump.
It really is. And they even add this bit, tested on 25 bushes, and claim it protects against Phytophthora.
Okay, Phytophthora. For listeners who maybe haven't had the misfortune of dealing with it, what exactly is that? Why is it such a big deal?
Oh, it's bad news. Phytophthora, often called late blight on tomatoes, it's a water mold.
Right.
Lives in the soil.
Right.
And it attacks the roots, the stems. The plant just wilts, goes brown, and eventually dies. It spreads like wildfire, too. Yeah, really hard to get rid of once it takes hold. So any claim about preventing it, that's significant. Gardeners pay attention to that.
Absolutely. And this source gives a very specific, three-step recipe for these supposed giant tomatoes and fighting off this blight.
Okay, what are the steps?
Step 1. When you plant your tomato seedling, you drop 1 aspirin tablet, importantly, a non-effervescent one, the regular kind, right into the hole.
1 tablet. Got it.
Step 2. You cover that aspirin with a bit of soil before the roots go in. So no direct root contact. That seems key.
Okay, little buffer layer. Makes sense.
And step 3 is the ongoing bit. Water like you normally would, but every 2 weeks or so, you mix up 2 aspirin tablets in about 5 liters of water.
2 tablets, 5 liters.
And you spray that solution onto the leaves.
Okay, so plant 1, spray 2 every couple of weeks. Seems straightforward enough.
If it works, yeah.
Right. And the source claims that if you stick to this for, about 2 months, you should see some pretty amazing things happening.
Yeah, the results they promise are, well, they're substantial. First off, size. They're reckoning your tomatoes will be 30, maybe even 50% larger than normal.
30 to 50%, that's a lot.
It is. And they're pretty firm on the Phytophthora thing. You just won't get it. Avoided completely.
Bold claim.
And the cherry on top, or maybe the tomato on top, is the leaves. They describe the foliage becoming incredibly lush, super healthy, a deep, dark green, like the Amazon jungle, they say.
Wow, okay. Painting quite a picture there. Vigorous plants, huge fruit, no killer diseases. So, does the source try to explain why this supposedly works? Is there any science mentioned?
There is, actually. They get into the why.
Yeah.
The key, according to them, is salicylic acid.
Yeah, right. The main thing in aspirin.
Exactly. They call it a natural plant immunomodulator, which is interesting because salicylic acid is a real plant hormone.
It is. Plants produce it themselves. It's like a signaling molecule. It helps plants respond to stress, triggers their defense mechanisms when they're under attack from pathogens.
So the thinking here is by adding extra salicylic acid from the outside via the aspirin.
You're sort of priming the pump, giving the plant's immune system a heads up, maybe making it react faster or stronger if a disease does show up.
That seems to be the logic. And that's how they explain the protection against fungi, like Phytophthora, activating those defenses.
Okay. And what about the bigger fruit?
They suggest the salicylic acid also speeds up cell division, more cells, faster growth, bigger tomatoes. Makes intuitive sense, I guess. And they tack on one more benefit. Improved nutrient absorption from the soil, which would, contribute to the overall health and yield.
Right. And these are all areas: defense, growth regulation, nutrient uptake, where salicylic acid is known to play some role in plant biology. The real questions are about the extent of that role and whether just chucking an aspirin in the ground is an effective way to influence it.
Good point. And they do try to add a bit more weight to it. They mention a study, University of Rhode Island.
Yeah.
Apparently, this study found a 37% reduction in Phytophthora risk when tomatoes were sprayed with an aspirin solution.
47%. Okay, that sounds specific. That sounds good.
It does sound good. But, was this a huge field study?
Mm-hmm.
A tiny lab test? Did anyone else replicate it? The source doesn't really say.
And that's the crucial bit, isn't it? Citing a study is one thing, but without the details, the methods, the scale, peer review, replication, it's hard to know how much stock to put in that single number.
Definitely. Agricultural research is complex. So many variables, weather, soil type.
Exactly. Results can vary wildly. But, okay, it suggests someone, somewhere, was looking into this scientifically. It's not purely folklore.
Speaking of folklore, the source then takes a turn into some more colorful territory, anecdotes and theories.
Ah, the fun stuff. Let's hear it.
Okay, first up, we have a tip attributed to a Fedor Ivanovich, his advice. Add a pinch of cinnamon to the planting hole, along with the aspirin.
Cinnamon? Why?
Extra rot protection, apparently. And they're supposed to give the tomatoes a subtle gingerbread aroma.
Gingerbread tomatoes. Seriously?
That's what it says. And there's this funny little aside about gardeners needing belts to tie up the tomato bunches because they get so massive from the aspirin.
Right, okay. Belts for tomatoes. And then there's Babushka Glaive, isn't there? Her story's even wilder.
Oh yeah, Babushka Glosstail is something else. So the story goes, she accidentally used 5 aspirin tablets per hole. Not 1. 5.
5? What happened? Did the plants just keel over?
Quite the opposite. According to this source, the result was tomatoes the size of melons.
Melons, come on.
I know. And it gets better. The source jokes that the tomatoes had a Bayer imprint, the aspirin brand, right on the skin.
Okay, now they're just having fun.
Totally. And apparently her neighbors freaked out, thought she was using some crazy chemicals or GMOs or something.
I mean, melon-sized tomatoes would raise some eyebrows, but what did Babushka say? Did the plant survive the overdose?
That's the kicker. She supposedly declared not a single disease stuck to them, despite the massive dose.
Huh. So 5 times the aspirin equals melon-sized, disease-proof tomatoes. Seems legit.
And then she started giving these giant tomatoes away with instructions titled, How to Scare Your Mother-in-Law.
Perfect. Okay, that's definitely leaning into the myth-making side of gardening hacks.
Absolutely. It shows how these things can take on a life of their own. And building on that, the source then describes what it calls the tomato apothecary conspiracy theory. Or maybe it's more like a ritual.
A ritual for tomatoes?
Kind of. It's presented tongue-in-cheek, I think, but it involves specific actions. You have to face your tomato bed, make sure your back is to any empty jars. Not sure why.
Okay.
And have your supplies ready. Aspirin, good soil, and specifically a galvanized watering can.
Galvanized. Right. Then what?
Then you recite an incantation, like a spoken wish.
An incantation for tomatoes? What do you say?
You wish for big red tomatoes, immune to Phytophthora, unaffected by heat or rain. Basically, perfect tomatoes.
Okay.
And it gets even more specific. You're told to spit on the roots 3 times.
Spit on the roots.
3 times. And then shout, grow, or you'll become ketchup.
Grow or become ketchup. I like that. It's got a certain urgency.
Right. It's all about this blend of action and strong intention, willing the plants to succeed.
And is there a final flourish?
Oh, yes. For a guaranteed result, if you haven't overdosed on aspirin like Babushka, you need to perform this entire ritual while wearing tomato-patterned gardening gloves.
Tomato-patterned gloves, that's the secret weapon.
Apparently so. It's a fun way of saying maybe a bit of extra enthusiasm, the right gear helps too.
It definitely lightens the mood. But then the source shifts again, doesn't it? To a more cynical take. The why pharmacies hide the truth conspiracy.
Yeah, that one's a bit darker. The theory here is that pharmacies are secretly in cahoots with the companies that make chemical fungicides.
Okay, how so?
The claim is that pharmacists deliberately add growth blockers to the aspirin they sell.
Growth blockers? In aspirin.
And label it not for agriculture. Why? To force gardeners to keep buying expensive chemical sprays instead of using cheap aspirin. It's all about protecting profits.
Ah, the classic suppressed cure narrative. Big industry holding back a simple, cheap solution.
Exactly. It taps into that distrust people sometimes have of large corporations or established systems.
Right.
Which there's usually no actual proof for these kinds of theories.
Right. But it's interesting that the source includes this angle. Then, after all the anecdotes and conspiracies, it brings in actual agronomists, agricultural scientists.
It does, yeah. And this part feels a bit more grounded. These scientists apparently confirm that, yes, salicylic acid does have real biological effects on plants.
So there's scientific agreement on the basic principle, aspirin could do something.
Right. It lends some credibility back to the core idea. However, These same experts issue a warning,
Bow.
overdoing it. They specifically caution against using too much aspirin because it can make the soil too acidic over time.
Ah, okay. That makes sense. Soil pH is critical for nutrient uptake. Too acidic, and plants can't get what they need even if it's there.
Exactly. So their recommendation is moderation. Use the aspirin spray, maybe, but not too often. Once every 2 weeks, tops.
That aligns with the earlier instructions, actually. And it highlights that balance is key. Even potentially helpful things can be harmful in excess.
Definitely. The agronomists also suggest combining the aspirin, if you use it, with potassium fertilizer, like adding wood ash or banana peels to the soil.
Right. Potassium is crucial for fruit development in tomatoes. So they're advocating for a more holistic approach, not just relying on aspirin.
Which neatly brings us to the source's own reality check. They explicitly state that aspirin isn't some kind of magic wand.
Good. Because it almost certainly isn't.
They emphasize that you still need solid, fundamental gardening techniques for any hope of success, aspirin or no aspirin.
Absolutely essential. Like what?
Well, things like choosing the right varieties in the first place. If you want big tomatoes, plant varieties known for being big, like Bull's Heart or Pink Giant, don't expect miracles from a cherry tomato variety.
Makes sense. What else?
Avoiding dense planting. Give your tomato space. Good air circulation helps prevent fungal diseases way more reliably than, maybe aspirin does.
Crucial point. Overcrowding is asking for trouble.
And, as the agronomist hinted, checking your soil pH. Tomatoes like it slightly acidic, ideally around 6 to 6.5. Get that wrong, and nothing else will work quite right.
These are the basics, the non-negotiables of growing good tomatoes.
Exactly. So the source, even while promoting the aspirin hack, ultimately grounds it in good practice.
Which is responsible, I suppose. It's not presented as a total replacement for skill and knowledge.
Right. Then, near the end, the source does this interactive thing. It asks readers to comment, believe in aspirin, or this is dangerous.
Trying to gauge opinion.
And they offer bait, a recipe for tomato jam that will stop your mother-in-law from nagging for people who participate actively.
Okay, that's creative engagement, I guess. Leans right back into the humorous, slightly edgy tone.
Totally. And the very final thought is quite amusing, too. It reassures the reader.
Yes.
That if their tomatoes do end up growing ridiculously large, maybe even pumpkin-sized.
Like babushka's melons, yeah.
It's not a mutation. Don't panic. It's just the aspirin, combined with your own stubbornness and, quote, gardening enthusiasm.
A nice, reassuring, slightly self-deprecating way to wrap it up. So after digging through all that, the claims, the science, the stories, the warnings, what are the main things you, the listener, should really take away?
Well, I think the first thing is that there's a tiny kernel of science here. Salicylic acid, the stuff in aspirin, is involved in plant defense and growth.
Yeah, that part seems plausible. The University of Rhode Island study mentioned, even if we lack context, hints at some actual research exploring this, but
the source we looked at piles on a lot of anecdotal stuff, right?
Yeah.
Funny stories, conspiracies, which are entertaining, but not exactly hard evidence.
Not at all. And crucially, even the source itself, through the agronomist's comments and its own advice, stresses that the basics matter most.
Absolutely. You can't ignore good gardening hygiene, proper spacing, the right soil pH, choosing suitable varieties. Aspirin isn't going to fix fundamental problems.
Precisely. Think of it maybe as a potential small boost under the right conditions. Perhaps it helps prime the plant's defenses a tiny bit. But it's definitely not a silver bullet or a substitute for knowing what you're doing in the garden.
So it's a fascinating mix, isn't it? A bit of science, a lot of folklore, some practical advice, and a dose of humor. It really shows the landscape of gardening advice out there.
It does. And maybe the final thought to leave you with is this. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, about the hidden potential in everyday things around us. We looked at aspirin today, but what other common items, what bits of folk wisdom might actually have some surprising science behind them, waiting to be properly understood or rediscovered?
Something to chew on, or maybe something to cultivate. Until our next deep dive.